It's Monday, January 5th, 2025. You cannot run, you cannot hide from the United States Armed Forces, breaking containment in the North Star State, and good news even better than you might have thought. Next on the AM Update. Happy New Year.
Mierda, marico, se prendió el peo en esta mierda, ¿oyó?
Those were some of the sounds heard overnight, Friday into Saturday, early on Saturday morning, over Caracas, Venezuela, as the United States carried out a strike which ended up with the capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro. American forces conducted a large-scale strike in Venezuela where Maduro and his wife were captured and transported on the USS Iwo Jima. Following the operation, Trump announced the United States is going to run Venezuela until a proper transition can take place. He made these comments about 10 hours after the successful raid.
We don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in, and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious because that's what we're all about. We want peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela, and that includes many from Venezuela that are now living in the United States and want to go back to their country. It's their homeland. We can't take a chance that somebody else takes over Venezuela that doesn't have the good of the Venezuelan people in mind. We've had decades of that. We're not going to let that happen. We're there now, and what people don't understand, but they understand as I say this, we're there now, but we're going to stay until such time as the proper transition can take place. So we're going to.
There is President Trump at the White House in the aftermath of the successful U.S. strike and capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro. More on the details of that strike and what it might mean coming up later on. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also had this at that news conference on Saturday morning.
Nicolás Maduro was indicted in 2020 in the United States. He is not the legitimate president of Venezuela. That's not just us saying it. The first Trump administration, the Biden administration, the second Trump administration, none of those three recognized him. He's not recognized by the European Union and multiple countries around the world. He is a fugitive of American justice with a $50 million reward, which I guess we saved $50 million. And
make sure.
Yeah, exactly. But
don't let anybody claim it. Nobody deserves it but us.
But I want to be clear about one thing. Nicolás Maduro had multiple opportunities to avoid this. He was provided multiple very, very, very generous offers and chose instead to act like a wild man, chose instead to play around. And the result is what we saw tonight. The other message here is the following. You have a guy, like many people around the world, they like to play games. You have a guy who decides he's going to invite Iran into his country, is going to, do the confiscation of American oil companies, is going to flood our country with gang members, is going to take Americans prisoner and try to hold them for hostage and trade them like he was able to do with the Biden administration. Basically likes to play games all this time and thinks nothing's going to happen. And I hope what people now understand is that we have a president. The 47th president of the United States is not a game player. When he tells you that he's going to do something, when tells you he's going to address a problem, he means it. He actions it. I can tell you, I've watched this process now for 14, 15 years, been around it. Everybody talks. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. When I get there, we're going to do this. We're going to take. This is a president of action. Like, I don't understand yet how they haven't figured this out. And now, if you don't know, now you know.
There's Secretary of State Marco Rubio discussing in some form the message that this sends to the rest of the world. Now, twice over the past 6 months, we've sent messages via our United States military. More again on that later. Well, as I said, Nicolás Maduro and his wife were slow-boated from Venezuela on the USS Iwo Jima. They stopped at Gitmo before they flew into New York City on Saturday night. Maduro was perp-walked at the DEA office in the New York City field office. He actually looked rather happy, jovial even, wishing some of the press a Happy New Year.
Good night. Good night. Happy New Year.
Nicolás Maduro, just a couple of months ago, singing John Lennon's Imagine. Now he's telling the press while he's walking through New York City in handcuffs, quote, Happy New Year. So what does this mean to Venezuelans, both the diaspora and back at home in Venezuela? I think this maybe sums it up. There's a ton of clips going around over the weekend, but this maybe sums it up the best. Quote, I don't know how this will all work out, but I'm asking everyone to have some faith. Don't fill your head with, oh, the Americans only want our oil. The Americans only want wealth. I ask these people, what do they think the Russians and Chinese wanted all this time? Are arepas recipes? Well done, random man on street Venezuelan. Speaking of the Chinese, maybe you saw this. They have been in bed with, or at least trying to get in bed with Venezuela for quite some time now. A good portion of their air defense, which apparently didn't work at all the other night, was Chinese technology. China, just hours before Nicolás Maduro was taken by the United States, China sent their Latin America delegation to Venezuela. They ostensibly had a front seat view of the raid on Maduro's compound. How about those apples? Back to Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, who talked about the so-called experts in our midst, now critical of what the United States accomplished over the weekend.
Okay, number one, most of the experts that people have on television, I watch these experts, and it's clown hour. Okay, these are people that have focused their entire career on the Middle East or some other part of the world because that's where all the action was. Very few of them know anything about Venezuela or the Western Hemisphere. Venezuela looks nothing like Libya. It looks nothing like Iraq. It looks nothing like Afghanistan. It looks nothing like the Middle East other than the Iranian agents that are running through there plotting against America. Okay, these are Western countries with long traditions among their at a people-to-people and cultural level and ties to the United States. So there's nothing like that. So I think people need to stop ascribing the apples and oranges here, the apples of the Middle East to the oranges of the Western Hemisphere.
But do you?
Secretary of State Marco Rubio there. This maybe alone, what he just articulated, is why I am totally in favor of what happened over the weekend. Totally in favor of it. And I'll explain more, again, coming up later on. President Trump, back at the Saturday press conference, was asked what is exactly America First about raiding Venezuela and Caracas and taking captive Nicolás Maduro.
Mr. President, why is running a country in South America America First?
Well, I think it is because we want to surround ourselves with good neighbors. We want to surround ourselves with stability. We want to surround ourselves with energy. We have tremendous energy in that country. It's very important that we protect it. We need that for ourselves. We need that for the world. And we want to make sure we can protect it.
Well, there was much more that happened over the long holiday vacation since we have been out. We'll talk about a lot of that coming up next. But first, before the break, there was a man-on-street interview on the Nate Friedman show with a communist protester, it looks, in New York City, discussing the events in and around Venezuela. This is just mind-numbing. Listen to this.
You should check out that communist flag over there.
What brings you out here today?
I'm organized with the Revolutionary Communists of America. We're out here to say hands off Venezuela, and we unequivocally stand with the people of Venezuela against U.S. imperialist aggression.
What do you think about the people of Venezuela celebrating on the streets?
What?
What do you think about the people of Venezuela celebrating on the streets today?
I saw images of Venezuelans being bombed after the U.S. bombed Caracas. So I'm not sure what you're talking about, but yeah, I think you should definitely
show me the bombings that you're talking about. I didn't see any.
I don't know. I just saw it on Reddit. It was on the front page of the internet. So
okay.
I don't know.
But what do you think about the people celebrating, the hundreds of thousands of people that are in the streets celebrating?
I have yet to see it. Can you show me that?
Yeah.
Sure. U.S. imperialism.
People celebrating on the streets here.
He's shown a video of Venezuelans, thousands of Venezuelans celebrating.
At the end of the day, I stand with the people of Venezuela against U.S. imperialism. The U.S. has no right to bomb the people of Venezuela. The U.S. has no right to kidnap another
Why
leader
are they
of another.
Celebrating? Why are they celebrating?
I don't know. Do you have a correspondent there who can ask?
That is courtesy of Nate Friedman, man on street interview. Boy on street interview with a communist. Hello. I saw on Reddit that Caracas was getting bombed, so now I'm here with my communist flag. Now, I haven't seen any videos of the people celebrating. I mean, mind-numbing ignorance there, but I heard it, so now you do as well. A broken containment in the North Star state, the Somali fraud scam taking to epic proportions. Also, more details on the Nashville trans shooter dropped while we were out, and some good news that's even better than you might have expected. That's coming up next. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
This is what happens when they target communities for their own benefit. This is what happens when they scapegoat. And this is what happens when they no longer hide the idea of white supremacy.
So there's Tim Walz. What's he talking about? White supremacy? Well, it's this story that broke containment over the weekend, or over the long break, I should say. Minnesota appears to be a mecca for fraudsters, particularly from the crime-ridden African nation of Somalia. Private citizens in the Trump administration have taken steps in recent weeks to neutralize and expose the worst cases of graft in Governor Tim Walz's backyard, including fraud committed by members of the Somali community in relation to coronavirus relief funding and student aid fraud plaguing the Gopher State's publicly funded schools. YouTuber Nick Shirley, a 23-year-old, has played an outsized role in this anti-fraud campaign. His Christmas week videos alleging massive fraud in taxpayer-subsidized Somali-run daycare facilities prompted the Department of Health and Human Services to announce it was derailing the gravy train. HHS Deputy Secretary Jim O'Neill said in a statement last week, quote, "We have frozen all child care payments to the state of Minnesota." In a corresponding video, O'Neill noted that intrepid journalists have made shocking and credible allegations of extensive fraud in Minnesota's child care programs. Alex Adams, Assistant Secretary of the HHS's Administration for Children's and Families, indicated that his office provides Minnesota with $185 million in child care funds annually. Shirley, that YouTuber, that 23-year-old, visited a number of ostensible child care facilities in Minnesota that each receive millions of dollars in government backing, only to find them apparently devoid of children. In one instance, Shirley visited Mako Childcare, whose owner is listed as Ayan Salah, and the Mini Childcare Center, which are housed in the same facility and appear to be one and the same. According to Shirley's documentary, the two outfits are together licensed for 120 children and rake in roughly $3 million each year. Shirley highlighted how the windows at one location were all blacked out and there was no outside play area and there was no evidence of any children on or around the site. Despite signage indicating that the facility is open 7 days a week from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m., the door was locked and no one responded to the doorbell. Another child care center that Nick Shirley visited was the Leering Center. Not Learning, Leering Center. They forgot the N. That was also empty as well. That story broke containment. What do I mean by that? Mainstream media. This was so obvious and just so ridiculous. Mainstream media was forced to actually cover this story. CBS, PBS, NPR. I saw a number of outlets trying to run cover for the Somali fraudsters like this guy who owns and operates, allegedly, one of these child care centers, who called a press conference. Yes, he called a press conference to announce that his office had been broken into, and no, there wasn't anything of value stolen, just the records of who he was caring for at his child care center.
Yesterday morning, I was called by the owner because, unfortunately, someone came in to our daycare. We looked and saw what happened, and we saw that the suspect came in from the back, broke in from the back kitchen, and he also destroyed the wall to come in. As we walked around the daycare, we saw that our office doors was broken into as well. We saw that, unfortunately, there was important documentation, enrollment of the children, and also employee documentation that was gone.
I know Somalians, I know this sounds so bad, but it is a fact. Amongst, I think, maybe all nations, Somalians have the lowest IQ on average amongst any country. And this is the lowest IQ scam. Calling a press conference to announce that burglars entered your facility, no, didn't take anything of value, no electronics, nothing like that. They went directly for the records, the documentation for children and employees there. Maybe the first burglary of its kind ever in recorded human history. Another quote-unquote Minnesota mom, another Somalian, got up to speak in defense of the Somali daycare operators, and had this incredible moment.
If childcare is cut, I'm unable to work or go to school. I understand fraud is bad.
At this point, she is visibly shaken. Right after she read the "I understand fraud is bad," she's visibly shaken. She covers her mouth, and she can't continue on with whatever she was reading from her script. I still don't understand why that was the case. I don't think she understood that she was actually saying fraud is bad, and we understand that. I think she thought she was implicating herself. Again, low IQ all the way around. Incredible. Let's move on to this story. This is some news. The Transgender Covenant school shooter in Nashville wrote a list of the quote-unquote advantages and disadvantages of attacking another Nashville school she attended, but ultimately backed out because the student body was mostly black, according to Twisted Journal entries released by the FBI last week. Audrey Hale, who killed 6 people at the Christian elementary school in 2023, was considering carrying out the carnage at IT Creswell Middle School, according to an entry penned sometime in 2021, but was concerned she would influence racist white shooters, end quote. That is a quote from her, quote. Predominantly black school, black people I love, Hale wrote, as the first among her disadvantage of attacking the middle school, which she attended between 5th and 8th grades, and listed as her first choice for her planned massacre. Her second reason for not attacking the school is because the, quote, black community in despair and suffering, and I don't want to cause that and don't want to harm them, dread. Black friends and black community will hate me. She also wrote she was worried that murdering black students would, quote, be likely to influence racist white shooters in the future. Hale ultimately chose the Covenant School as her target, listing among its advantages that it is a predominantly white school because I, quote, hate white people. She also noted that it was a Christian school. Demonic possession, demonic oppression on full display. She wanted to go to that school and shoot up a Christian school because it was predominantly white and because it was predominantly Christian. We go to Iran, where protests in numerous cities continue to persist. At least 10 people have been killed by the regime as economic protests sweep the nation, and Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei signaled over the weekend that he is cracking down. Rioters must be put in their place, the 86-year-old leader told an audience in Tehran on state television. His remarks likely give security forces approval to use aggressive tactics against demonstrators. The unrest represents Iran's largest protest since 2022, when Mahsa Amini died in police custody after her arrest for violating hijab rules. Demonstrations have now spread to more than 100 locations across 22 of Iran's 31 provinces. Economic frustration over the collapsing rial currency drove Iranians into the streets. Many protesters have also directed their anger at the Islamic theocracy itself. So, this is still status quo inside the regime until it's not anymore. It seemed like this was a little more widespread, a little bit more aggressive in terms of the demonstrators themselves than maybe recent protests, but something to keep an eye on nonetheless. We go back to New York City, where Zohran Mamdani is now officially mayor. He was sworn in over the New Year holiday, and he had this to say in his inaugural address.
We will draw this city closer together. We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism. If our campaign demonstrated that the people of New York yearn for solidarity, then let this government foster it. Because no matter what you eat, how you pray, or where you come from, the words that most define us are the two we all share: New Yorkers.
So you heard at the beginning of that clip, Zohran Mamdani saying, we will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism. I don't know, over the weekend I saw American service members, frigid and rugged themselves, arresting the warmth of collectivism for his crimes against humanity. We did see that. It is pretty ironic that Nicolás Maduro is being dumped in Zohran Mamdani's New York City. Of course, Maduro came to power thanks to the socialist uprising in Venezuela. It was an outcrop of that. There's more details there, but it was an outcrop of that. He's a socialist, an avowed socialist himself. And now he's sitting in a jail cell in New York City, which just elected a socialist. And now there's nothing Zohran Mamdani can do about that because it's a federal issue. It is hilarious. Well, when we come back from our next break, some good news. You probably saw this in multiple places over the weekend, but there's reason to believe it may be better than you expected. Also, some overall thoughts on what we saw out of Venezuela over the weekend. That's coming up next. "2025 experienced the largest single-year decline in homicides in U.S. history. The plunge brings official U.S. homicide rates to near record lows. Based on a sampling of preliminary crime statistics from 550 U.S. law enforcement agencies, the year is expected to end with a 20% decrease in homicides nationwide. The drop comes after what many law enforcement analysts called the pandemic surge. The Biden-era explosion in homicides and overall crime was considered endemic to Democrat-controlled cities across the U.S. So you've probably seen some of these stories and headlines about how the homicide rate dropped precipitously in 2025. Well, maybe better than you even think. During the Biden era, criminal data collection was incomplete due to a sudden change in the FBI's summary reporting system. Starting in 2021, the FBI began transitioning to a new method called the National Incident-Based Reporting System. This transition was officially slated to take up to 5 years to complete, and during the changeover, a large percentage of U.S. cities were not required to submit complete crime stats, meaning as bad as the pandemic surge was, the real crime rate was likely much higher than reported. By the end of 2024, however, crime data coverage returned to around 95% of the population. This is rather, of course, convenient for Democrats, given they had a convenient excuse to suppress true crime rates through lack of reporting. Then the reporting system went back to normal as soon as Donald Trump returned to office. If the stats are accurate for 2025, this means the Trump administration has overseen the largest drop ever in homicides in the U.S. in its first year without the benefit of incomplete FBI data. That is insane. And you wonder how much of this violent crime wave that wasn't even reported to its utmost, really wasn't reported to its fullness because of the broken crime reporting system that the FBI was trying to implement. And that puts it into perspective. The closing of the border might be the single biggest boon to America's safety in my lifetime, for sure. Also, 2025, lowest mass shooting rate since 2006. Lowest rate of homicides, as we talked about, since probably the 1950s. Lowest suicide since 2020. Lowest road fatalities since 2019. Lowest drug overdose deaths since 2019. And lowest alcohol consumption in recorded history. That doesn't include the prohibition. And it's also had the lowest inflation since 2020, and that inflation continues to tick down. Let's go to this. A federal appeals court struck down California's ban on openly carrying firearms in heavily populated areas last week, dealing a major blow to the state's gun control laws. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled 2-1 that California's prohibition on open carry permits in counties with populations exceeding 200,000 is unconstitutional. The ban covers areas where roughly 95% of the state's residents live. Judge Lawrence Van Dyke wrote in the majority opinion that the restriction fails under the Supreme Court's 2022 ruling in the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, which required gun laws to align with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. So even in California, gun owners may be feeling a little bit of ease. Let's go to this from Qantas Insights. It's an account on X, compiling and outlining some data from the London Stock Exchange reported on by Reuters. Qantas Insights says global capital is betting on America, and the numbers are impossible to ignore. Foreign private investors are buying U.S. assets at a $1.65 trillion annual pace, up nearly 40% from last year. Equity inflows are surging, treasuries are in demand, and corporate bonds are seeing strong overseas buying. This strong, confidence-driven allocation by sophisticated investors is looking 12 to 24 months ahead. U.S. growth looks resilient. American institutions remain solid. global alternatives don't measure up, according to Qantas Insights. Again, this is compiled data from the London Stock Exchange, tracking the number of inflows in capital into the United States. And it is up 40%. I don't know. Either the London Stock Exchange is just lying, or that's a really, really good sign. Now, things are not where they need to be economically. The housing market is still, something has to break there, and I think something will break probably this year. We might even see a little bit of economic turmoil this year. But in terms of the long term, at least medium term outlook, it's looking pretty good. Starting January 1st of this year, Americans in 5 states who receive government assistance for groceries facing new limits on buying soda, candy, and other items with those benefits. Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, Utah, and West Virginia are the first of at least 18 states to implement waivers restricting certain purchases under the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Sugary drinks, sugary snacks, things of that nature will be restricted under these new guidelines. And finally, air analysis, slightly acidic, mostly necessary. Let's go first to this from the chairman for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That would be Dan Raisin Kane, who went into more details about the operation to bring into custody Nicolás Maduro, now former Venezuelan dictator.
Last night, the president ordered the United States military to move forward with this mission. He said to us, and we appreciate it, Mr. President, good luck and Godspeed. And those words were transmitted to the entire joint force. Over the course of the night, aircraft began launching from 20 different bases on land and sea across the Western Hemisphere. In total, more than 150 aircraft, bombers, fighters, intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance, rotary wing were in the air last night. Thousands and thousands of hours of experience were airborne. Our youngest crew member was 20, and our oldest crew member was 49, and there's simply no match for American military might. As the night began, the helicopters took off with the extraction force, which included law enforcement officers, and began their flight into Venezuela at 100 feet above the water. As they approached Venezuelan shores, the United States began layering different effects provided by Spacecom, Cybercom, and other members of the interagency to create a pathway. Overhead, those forces were protected by aircraft from the United States Marines, the United States Navy, the United States Air Force, and the Air National Guard. The force included F-22s, F-35s, F-18s, EA-18s, E-2s, B-1 bombers, and other support aircraft, as well as numerous remotely piloted drones. As the force began to approach Caracas, the Joint Air Component began dismantling and disabling the air defense systems in Venezuela, employing weapons to ensure the safe passage of the helicopters into the target area. The goal of our air component was, and always will be to protect the helicopters and the ground force and get them to the target and get them home. As the force crossed the last point of high terrain where they'd been hiding in the clutter, we assessed that we had maintained totally the element of surprise. As the helicopter force ingressed towards the objective at low level, we arrived at Maduro's compound at 1:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 2:01 a.m. Caracas local time, and the apprehension force descended into Maduro's compound and moved with speed, precision, and discipline towards their objective and isolated the area to ensure the safety and security of the ground force while apprehending the indicted persons. On arrival into the target area, the helicopters came under fire, and they replied with that fire with overwhelming force in self-defense. One of our aircraft was hit but remained flyable, and as the president said earlier today, all of our aircraft came home, and that aircraft remained flyable during the rest of the mission. As the operation unfolded at the compound, our air and ground intelligence teams provided real-time updates to the ground force, ensuring those forces could safely navigate the complex environment without unnecessary risk. The force remained protected by overhead tactical aviation. Maduro and his wife, both indicted, gave up, and were taken into custody by the Department of Justice, assisted by our incredible U.S. military with professionalism and precision.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Raisin Kane, in more detailed explanation of the operation that captured now former Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro. This is now two times in the past 6-ish months, the United States military has sent a message. The first time, Operation Midnight Hammer, was this: you cannot hide, you cannot protect your nuclear facilities or any other sort of infrastructure for ill motivation, ill intent, whether it's nuclear weapons or otherwise. You cannot hide, you cannot protect your nuclear facilities or other infrastructure if you're within a 14,000-mile round trip of our B-2 bombers, and you're going to have no idea what's happening until the bombs actually explode. That was the message sent by Operation Midnight Hammer. The second message was this: there is no title, President of Venezuela, Commander-in-Chief of Venezuela. There's no title. There's no fortress. Maduro and his wife tried to reach a safe room inside their heavily fortified compound. Couldn't even do that. And there's no force. I mean, from what we can see so far, there was really no anti-aircraft in Venezuela that actually worked. So there's no title, no fortress, no force that can keep you safe if we want to put you on a slow boat to the federal courthouse of our choosing in the middle of the night. That was the message that was sent over the weekend. I don't really care if you like or agree with any of these actions. The reality is that these operations have projected terrifying strength. Terrifying strength. It is scary what we are capable of. And you know who that's scary to as well? If it's scary to me, I'm on Team America. If it's scary to me, guess what it is to an enemy of America? Terrifying. Terrifying. I mean, what a change from the senility of Joe Biden, the feebleness of Joe Biden, and the assured vacuousness of Kamala Legook. So those are the messages that the United States military has sent. So putting that aside, what's going on in Venezuela? People have said it's about oil. People have said it's about American hegemony in the West. People have said it's about nation building, that this is going to be no different than Iraq or Afghanistan, to which Marco Rubio correctly put them in their place. This is a much different situation. This is well within our sphere of influence. This is well within the Monroe Doctrine. Well, the Monroe Doctrine was for European colonialism, and we have colonialism. It's Chinese colonialism. It's Iranian colonialism. They're trying to colonize. It's Hezbollah colonialism. They were all trying to colonize Venezuela right here in our own hemisphere. For what reason? There's no other reason than to screw with us, the United States. So the Monroe Doctrine, yes, we should be making that in full force. As Marco Rubio also aptly pointed out, the worldview of a place like Venezuela, much more in line with ours than anywhere in the Middle East outside of Israel. So, for those reasons, is it about the oil? Yes, but not really. Is it about the drugs? Yes, but not really. Is it about hegemony? Yes, but not really. Is it about sending a message? Yes, but not really. It's all of the above. I think closer to home, especially given the fact that, we just saw it over the weekend, and I mentioned this in passing, the Chinese, their Latin America delegation, had a front row seat to this. That's a slap in their face. Their air defense systems, which from what I've seen, Venezuela's air defense systems paid for and brought to you by Chinese money and technology. And they totally failed while the Chinese delegation was in Caracas watching this unfold. What a slap in the face. That's a bitch slap to the Chinese. So was it about sending a message? Yes. Was it about oil and really tapping into Venezuela's oil reserves? Yes. But not for us, for Venezuela. And of course, the global market will reap the benefits. Was it about sending a message and getting some of the worst elements of scum and villainy out of our hemisphere? Yes. All of those things were accomplished in an extremely surgical strike. Now, say this with this in effect. If we're going to nation build in Venezuela, I'd much rather try to nation build in Venezuela than I would in the Middle East. Do we know for sure that's what's going to happen here? No. It sounds like, if you read in between the lines, the United States leadership here is pretty confident that they're going to be able to work through and work with the vice president of Venezuela. So it's not really a regime change. You see those pictures of CIA Director John Ratcliffe sitting next to Donald Trump in the Mar-a-Lago Situation Room? Things that make you go, Things that make you go, Because if you read in between the lines, again, if you're picking up what I'm putting down, if you read between the lines, it sounds like the sitting vice president of Venezuela is probably going to be the point person for the United States running the show. The sitting vice president. So the same regime. And you saw the CIA director sitting right next to Trump in the Situation Room. Again, things that make you go, So, all that said, I'm totally down with what happened over the weekend. This is an evil man doing evil things with evil intentions in our own hemisphere. Within a day's flight or less of our country. It's really past due that this was done. And by the way, poor Nicolás Maduro, we really are doing him a solid, though. We really are. When you're the head of state, there's a million things to worry about on a daily basis. When you're in prison, there's only one thing to worry about. That's going to do it for a Monday. Good to be back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.